Okay. Hello, and welcome to KQED's Teach Do Now webinar in partnership with the National Writing Project and Educator Innovator. It's Monday, July 7th, and today we'll be talking about professional learning networks. I'm your host, Matt Williams, educational technologist at KQED, the Bay Area Public Media Station, and I'm thrilled to kick off this course with such amazing guests. Before I introduce everyone, I'd like to take a second to explain this webinar in relation to the course and what you should be expecting the week ahead. Teach Do Now is an online course open to anyone, but targeted for teachers who are interested in learning how to integrate social media and 21st century learning approaches to their teaching practice. This course is designed to present these ideas using tools like Twitter and Google+ so that participants can experience their learning in action. This 6-week course presents a framework for learning where weekly topics are introduced through our Monday webinars. Participants are encouraged to participate with questions and comments during the webinar, and you can even watch the archive video later in the week and share comments. You can also go deeper into the conversation through our weekly Do Now prompts, which we provide useful resources to help steer the remainder of the weekly conversation. Unlike traditional face-to-face courses or even many online courses, this course is happening at any time and anywhere for you, the participant, to share your ideas, reply to others, ask questions, and be present when the time is right for you. We all come to this course with vastly different backgrounds and knowledge of social media, either personally or professionally. We want this environment to embrace the diversity of our participants' knowledge. Just a reminder to use the hashtag TeachDoNow so people can see your comments. And a great way to see all of the comments is on our tag board at tagboard.com/TeachDoNow, which pulls all comments from Twitter and Google+. And lastly, all of the resources for discussion can be found at www.kqed.org/teachdonow. Whew, that was a mouthful. So today, our guests are Tina Barseghian, who will be co-moderating with me, Sheryl Nussbaum-Beach, Larry Ferlazzo, and Vicki Davis. I'd like to give them a chance to briefly introduce themselves, so we'll start with Larry. Why don't you come on in and introduce yourself?
Well, thanks, Matthew. It's an honor to be with you and the other panelists. I'm a high school teacher in Sacramento, California, in Sacramento's largest inner city high school, and teach English and social studies. And I write a resource sharing blog for educators, as well as a weekly teacher advice column for Education Week, and write regularly on teaching English language learners for the New York Times. And I've written several books on parenting engagement, student motivation, and teaching English language learners.
Great. Great to have you, Larry. Sheryl, why don't you introduce yourself?
Hey there, so glad to be here, and thanks for getting us started today. I'm Sheryl Nussbaum-Beach, and I am the CEO and co-founder of Powerful Learning Practice, which is a professional learning company for connected educators. I also have written the book called The Connected Educator, Learning and Leading in a Digital Age. I co-authored that book with Lonnie Ritter-Hall. And then I have the great opportunity of serving on the ISTE board, and we just had another annual ISTE conference. Many of you were probably there, and I had a great time, but glad to be back home. It's nice to meet everyone.
Thank you, Sheryl. And Tina, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Tina Barseghian. I'm the editor of MindShift. This is a news website I launched about 4 years ago about the intersection of learning and technology, and also all the trends that teachers are interested in pushing their teaching practices further. I try to cover the gray areas, the complexities of many of the issues that educators care about in engaging their students, in understanding where they're coming from, and attempting to elevate their education to the next level. And so MindShift is updated, I would say, every day, daily articles about trends in learning.
Awesome. Thanks for being on and co-moderating, Tina. Vicki, why don't you come on?
Hey everybody, my name is Vicki Davis. It's an honor to be here with three very important, well really four if you count National Writing Project, but Larry and MindShift and Sheryl are all very important parts of my PLN. And I'm a teacher in South Georgia, very rural South Georgia, where it's a heat index of over 100 right now. And without my PLN, I just wouldn't exist. I've written a book, co-written a book, Flattening Classrooms, Engaging Minds, on global collaboration. My new book is called Reinventing Writing, and PLN and connecting are a big part of my own life. So I'm glad to be here and really honored to be here with people who I learn from every single day. In fact, some of you, this is my first time getting to see your beautiful faces, so it's great to be here.
Great. Thank you, Vicki. To those who are watching live right now, we welcome your comments via the TeachDoNow hashtag on Twitter or the Google Plus page. You can also sign into the chat window on this page at educatorinnovator.org and converse there. We look for your questions that we can address here in the Google Hangout, but I have some to start with as well. We will begin our first week of the course, and the topic is about professional learning networks. Excuse me a sec. So Will Richardson, who's the author of blogs, wikis, podcasts, and other powerful web tools for classrooms, suggests that before we jump into learning tools, we need to be selfish about taking the time to discover the transformative potential of social media in our lives. He states, before you attempt to bring these technologies to your students, be selfish about their use in your own learning practice. While there is no doubt that his classes were in many ways profoundly changed by blogs, wikis, and the like, the bigger truth is that the transformation in his own personal learning practice is what informed his work with his students. It wasn't until he fully understood how these technologies could facilitate global connections and conversations around his own passions and how they could help him create more powerful learning networks and communities that he was able to see what needed to change in terms of curriculum and teaching. So I'm going to begin the question with you, Larry, and ask if you can give some specific examples of how you leverage your professional learning network.
Well, several ways. One, learning about what other teachers are doing in other parts of the country, or even here in California, through Twitter, through other social media, through Facebook. I'm able to get lots of great ideas. Also, it's helped my geography class of English language learners through social media. I was able to connect up with English classes throughout the world, and we're able to have sister classes for almost every country that we were studying during geography. In addition, I think through social media, I'm also able to sort of amplify my voice and to be able to share my beliefs, not just about what should be done in the classroom, but also around education policy. And it's just a great way to meet people who think similarly, and to also with people who think a little differently and have different perspectives.
Very cool. Sheryl, would you like to chime in?
Sorry about that. It takes a second to get it unmuted.
It's all good.
Yeah, my personal learning network is really valuable to me in many different ways. Interestingly enough, all of us in Powerful Learning Practice live in different places of the world and the country, and so we're able to leverage each other and leverage each other's networks as a way that we keep the company going. But a perfect example would be The Connected Educator, the book that I wrote. That book never touched paper until Solution Tree decided to print it. The whole thing was done through collaboration with my personal learning network. Lonnie and I did everything on Google Docs, and so just leveraging my personal learning network in the middle of the night, people in Australia, all around the world, in order to be able to be a deep learner. All the time, if I have questions, I'll throw it out to Twitter or on different blogs, and people that I've never met will come in and be able to weigh in on those things. It's sort of like Tennyson says, that we're a part of all that we've met, and it certainly is so. One of the things that I've found it's most exciting is when I'll go to a conference or something and I'll finally meet someone that I've been learning from regularly and maybe even co-constructing ideas with online, and then where we had worked together all this time in a personal learning network and yet had never met face-to-face. And so I wouldn't be who I am if it wasn't for my personal learning network.
Great, thank you, Sheryl. Vicki, how about you? I'd be curious to know how you got started. Perhaps like were you like the quote that I read from Will Richardson? Like, were you playful at first? Like, what did you gravitate towards?
Well, I believe that educators who care share. And in 2005, when I went and saw David Warlick speak at the GAETC conference, before then, I had always come back with a list of 50 or 60 things and didn't really get anything done. So I always advise teachers always have 3 things. So my 3 things were blogs, wikis, and social bookmarking. Those were the first 3 things that I really got started in. So first I started wikis with my students because you always start with what you want to do. So cooperative learning was very high on our list. From my curriculum director, so I started with that, and then I started blogging myself, and then it just kind of moved from there. I had no idea what would happen. I mean, I've co-created more than 20 global collaborative projects now, connecting my students to more than 30 classrooms, 30 countries around the world, and it's a different mindset. My students can travel without having traveled. Through things like Mystery Skype, which that's just the very beginning, but my students actually co-write. So, for example, they were studying physics of the future this year with a classroom, Aaron Mauer's classroom in Bettendorf, Iowa, and that fantastic book is by Michio Kaku. So instead of talking about 3D organ printing, the students were actually researching it together. They created videos together on WeVideo, and that sort of thing. A lot of it now starts on Twitter. Used to back in 2006, it started with a blog comment. But now Twitter is really a place where you can connect your classroom if you know the right hashtags. And I believe that Teach Do Now, you're going to find a lot of like-minded people that are part of the MOOC here. And as you connect and you see actively engaged people here who stick with it, those are going to be active, engaged people who stick with a project with your classroom. So that's a perfect place to find like-minded people when you have an activity like this where you're all learning and sharing together.
Great.
Vicki, do you mind extrapolating a little bit on Mystery Skype? I don't know if everybody knows about that.
Sure. Well, Mystery Skype is just the very beginning level. So there's different levels of collaborating globally, which we talk about in the book, Flattening Classrooms, Engaging Minds. And the first is just information exchange. We call it Global Collaboration 2.0, where you just exchange information, but it's very, very powerful. So, for example, you can talk all day long about China, but when your students connect with China or Nepal or India, and they actually meet students via Skype or Google Hangout, they're doing it all different ways, and they basically play 20 questions. And they ask questions to try to figure out where they are in the world. Cool. And then they ask questions back and forth. And they have to do a lot of reasoning to figure out where is that other classroom. And a lot of teachers now have maps, and they'll map it out. All the classrooms they've mystery Skyped with. I mean, I know teachers that do it twice a week. I don't know how they keep up that pace, and plus you've got time zones. But I do know we did it with our 5th grade classroom in Nepal, and we gave our students the choice. The only time we could do it was 7 a.m., and we said we can't make you come to school at 7 a.m., but you can come if you want to. Every single 5th grader came and Skyped with Nepal, even the kids who were late every day. So it's a fantastic way to get started with global collaboration and connection.
That's an incredible example of the power of technology in this way. And Larry, you mentioned you had found some sister cities to also correspond with. Can you tell us how you found that network?
Sure. Well, one, there are tons of groups that are specifically designed to help classes who want to connect up with other sister classes around the world. I mean, on my blog I have quite a few of the best lists, and one of those is a best list listing those organizations. What I did is I just put out a call on social media, Twitter, Facebook, and on my blog saying these are the countries we're going to be studying during the year. We're interested in just my students would compose a video, getting speaking practice. They would be learning a little bit about the country, and then they would ask questions, a series of questions that they want to learn more about. They'd post the video on YouTube, and then in turn, we'd invite that class to ask our students questions about life in the United States. And it worked out great. It was an overwhelming response. I mean, one of the advantages of doing something like this, it's not a long, drawn-out process. It's short and it's done.
It's short, and it sounds like it's not a lot of work, but it's extremely powerful experience for the students, because I bet you that's what they talk about when they get home with their parents.
Oh,
that's the thing.
Oh, clearly, that's what. Oh yeah, to be able to they're all excited when they get their questions answered, right? And it just creates, more interest in wanting to learn more.
Great.
Vicki, I wanted to ask you a question. There's a question for you from the chat, but before that, you once wrote that a real teacher helping teachers be really excellent is what you strive to do as a professional development sort of instructor. Can you talk a little bit about that? Like, what kinds of things would you tell teachers? What are your strategies for helping teachers, particularly teachers who are new to thinking about using online resources and social media for learning?
Well, one of my goals when I realized that people were actually reading my blog is I believe when you get a spotlight, you should get out a mirror. There are a lot of amazing educators doing incredible work, and we do a grave disservice when we think we're the only one, because we're totally not. So, for example, I have a show called Every Classroom Matters, where I interview teachers around the world and talk about all the incredible things they're doing, and then try to create patterns and help make connections. I kind of view myself as a connector, but there's a real collapse in best practices sharing. So used to, there was quite a float. A researcher would go observe your classroom, they would notice something, they would have anecdotal evidence from teachers, they would start collecting it, then they would research, and then they would share out. Well, now researchers can actually watch conversations on EdChat or EdTech Chat and see patterns, and that research can happen much more quickly than it used to. So that's one of the most exciting things about building your PLN, is just how quickly best practices can move. For example, Voxer is a rapidly growing tool for teachers and educators to share, either making mastermind groups where they're sharing and getting ideas from other people. They'll use it for emergencies, they'll use it for book studies. So that's just one example of a best practice that is really taking education by storm and building these very powerful connections. And did you ask that second question you wanted to ask? I'm not sure if you said it out loud. I see it in the chat.
I was just wondering what your strategies are for teaching teachers to kind of jump into an immersive world of online learning.
Yeah, the biggest thing is for teachers to jump in is just to take it slowly and pick the place that you want to connect. For example, in my Twitter account, I actually use my Twitter account to share with teachers and with my students, but I have older students. I also encourage them to create Twitter accounts for different projects. So Gamified, a big, massive project, intergenerational learning experience that my 10th graders did with master students at the University of Alaska. They had a Twitter handle for that. Now, a lot of teachers who have elementary classrooms will create a separate Twitter account and have their class Twitter account and their personal Twitter account. So there's all different ways that you can jump in and do it. There are a lot of best practices out there. But here's the other thing to remember. Say you can't do Twitter, you can always use classtools.net and use fake Twitter or fake Facebook and bring elements of Twitter. There are teachers using Twitter elements using Post-it notes. So there's so many ways to bring social media into your classroom. Even if everything's blocked, you can still use that. But I believe a teacher's job, our job is to be a connector with other classrooms and other experts. So, for example, I was talking to Matt Wallert, who's a behavioral researcher for Bing, and then I got him to Skype in to my classroom on January 3rd to talk to my students about behavioral psychology and search engines and privacy. So that happened on Twitter. That's part of my job.
That's great. Sheryl, would you like to chime in on that as well? Like, what are your strategies for helping teachers kind of climb on to this new?
So one of the things that we do on a regular basis, this is kind of what we do at Powerful Learning Practices, we help people get started developing their personal learning networks. And actually, the gentleman you quoted at the beginning, Will Richardson, and I co-founded PLP together, and we used to get into like this, it was every single time we'd have a kickoff, him and I would kind of arm wrestle around this idea of network literacy and how you go about choosing who you're going to follow and how many people to follow. And he would always say, well, Sheryl always believes differently than I do. I think you should follow about 10 or 15 people in the beginning and really cherry pick them and think about what they're doing, and I would follow thousands of people. And the reason that I did is because I would deliberately follow people that were brand new to Twitter, and I wanted to do that and not just pick out people that I was going to learn from and have a very diverse personal and professional learning network, but also pick out people who were just getting established so that they knew somebody was interested in listening to their voice and really wanted to hear what they had to say. And then through immersion and through modeling, I could retweet something they did, or I would private message them and say, this is absolutely fantastic, watch what I'm going to do with it to make sure that you can get more followers. Or so I would take that opportunity to kind of mentor people, both that were involved in PLP and those that weren't, that I saw that maybe were posting kind of provocative things, were someone I was following, and so I knew they were new to the Twitter space, and I think that's an important thing. I also think it's important to follow some of the hashtags that have to do with posting on students' work, so that when students are putting some of their best pedagogy and their best thinking up online, that we can go and make comments on those and find them. And so teaching people new to Twitter who are trying to find their Twitter legs and figure out how to do everything, this is something you can do. You can go comment on, either follow people that are also new or go comment on students. The other thing I do is, and I'm going to put the link inside the chat room that everybody's following, is that Connected Educator Month is in the month of October, and I know I'll probably have a chance to talk about that. And it's a place where people who are brand new, just getting connected, just thinking about the idea, and people who are very seasoned can spend the whole month doing really interesting things. One of the things I did last year is Powerful Learning Practice created a Getting Started kit that really takes you through step by step how to start building your personal learning network. And I just put the link inside the chat room on the Educator Innovator page.
Great.
That's great, thanks.
Well, I would like to just add, having covered education and the sort of evolution of social media and building social networks over the last 4 years, how far things have come just from the time I started MindShift 4 years ago. And it seems to me now that education has taken over so much of the really important talks that are happening on social media. Do you guys feel like there has been a progression as well, or do you feel like there's still vast numbers of teachers out there who haven't even begun to touch this phenomenon and really become a part of it and used it well? Where do you think we're at in the landscape? Vicki, do you want to take that?
I'm still seeing a lot of teachers get started. I think we always have to be welcoming to beginners. And have this perspective of a newbie, because at some point, like I just joined Voxer, I'm a newbie there. I may not be a newbie at Twitter, but I'm still finding a lot of teachers who are just now getting on Twitter and they get so excited. And then there's some teachers who don't get on Twitter, but like you go to Laura Candler's page on Facebook, she has 500,000 educators talking about education on her Facebook page every day. So, and then you have them on Pinterest. Elementary educators are really big on Pinterest. And then you have teachers on Instagram. So I think that it's very, very personal. To me, the question is, are you connecting? And are you sharing? Because educators who care share. It may not be a big deal to you, but it's a big deal to somebody. And I think that teachers are teachers are so modest, like real everyday classroom teachers. I'm not talking about people who speak on the circuit, because they tend to have a little bit more of an outgoing nature. But average everyday teachers tend to be very, very modest and think maybe what they're doing is not a big deal. And if we can just get teachers to share just little things, we'll continue to see a lot of growth. But I think Connected Educators Month really did a lot, Sheryl, this past year to really show people what was out there, you know?
Yeah. Larry, do you have any advice for people on how to, on teachers who want to get started? What do you think? What are some of the best ways?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think my sense is that the vast majority of educators still don't engage in any kind of social media in the context of education. I think, is like Vicki was saying. I mean, I think they're on Facebook and they're on some of the social media. But even if you look at Twitter, I think it's I don't really remember the exact percentage, but I think it's just like, isn't it less than 20% of everybody, of people in the U.S. have even tried Twitter, or closer to 11%? But I think there are some simple ways to get started. You know, one very easy way is University of Southern California Rossier School of Education has something they call the Teach 100, which lists the most popular education blogs according to their algorithm, which I'm not quite convinced the algorithm is actually correct, but the bottom line is.
I hope it's correct because MindShift is up there.
Oh, okay. Well, but there's certainly, by starting there, to identify which blogs are the most popular, and many of them also have Twitter accounts where they share not just the blog posts, but resources from other places. I think that's a good way to start. I think a great way to start with Twitter is once you begin to follow a bunch of people, if you don't want to take the time to be logging to Twitter all the time, there's a site called Nuzzle, N-U-Z-Z-E-L, which will give you a daily email highlighting the most popular tweets that have been shared by the people that you follow in the previous day. You know, I mean, I think, you know, simple things like that. Because I just think a lot of educators, I mean, we're all really busy.
Yeah, and I mean, and Twitter is so quickly moving. It's so hard. I mean, in some ways, you know, it's kind of a deluge of information with lots of links and, you know, aspirational and inspirational quotes and things like that. It's hard to know, like, where, you know, for a teacher who's beginning, you know, where to get their hands wrapped around that. Sheryl, do you have any advice other than Connected Educator Month, which I think is really important? We'll highlight again, but you know, what's the first step of wading in that might be easy, if you have some ideas?
Yeah, I think probably the best place to start, if you're just starting to dip your toe into the connected waters, is going to be first to gravitate towards your connected friends within the school or within the organization. Secondly, is to start with blogs. I don't like to start people with Twitter unless it's like bring your unconnected friend to a Twitter chat and you're kind of there with them and there's the squeal of excitement and fun, and you know, because it goes by, especially if you're in a popular one, it goes by really fast pace. I would rather have them start with reading blog posts. So if I've got someone who's not connected at all but maybe even interested, or I'm trying to get them interested, then I might send them a blog post like MindShift. You know, I might say, hey, go check this out. This is something that really pertains to you and your passion and what you're interested in. Or I might send them something that's really provocative that'll get them stirred up, maybe something they disagree with on Huffington Post or somewhere like that. And then once they start reading blogs, then I make recommendations to attend a particular hashtag chat. I also think it's important for people that are leading hashtag chats to really think about the fact that they might have some people that want to participate, but they're a little bit intimidated. And so sometimes before I start a chat, or even if I'm hosting a chat for someone else, which I think is important, if you're well established in the connected space, you want to volunteer or be willing when people ask you to come to panel discussions or lead hashtag chats so that you can use that as a form of modeling and giving back. But I usually start by saying, hey, if you're new to Twitter chats, don't worry. The most important thing is you use the hashtag, the number symbol in the hashtag. The second most important thing is that you retweet things that you think are important. And if you have a question, to ask someone, because we'll all be glad to help you. And then I've noticed that every hashtag chat that I have the opportunity to host or lead, people will always say, this is my first one, and so then there'll be people behind the scenes that'll sort of start, holding their hand a little bit, metaphorically, if you will, and help them through it. Because I think inviting the unconnected to connected spaces should be a professional responsibility for each of us.
That's great. Tina, can I ask you just quickly, because Sheryl did discuss a little bit about starting with blog posts and MindShift being a great resource for that. Can you talk about some of the popular posts on MindShift and what you think attracts educators to those posts?
Sure. First of all, I'll keep this super brief because I think our resident pros are going to be much more adept at speaking to this. But just quickly, I'll say the MindShift posts that tend to do best are the ones that talk about elevating the learning experience from just sort of doing, rote worksheets to something that is student-centered, student-driven, inquiry-based, project-based, get kids thinking, get their wheels really turning, get their hands dirty, and this idea of like the messy, chaotic, controlled chaos. Those are the kinds of posts that really resonate most with MindShift readers. And I think there's this element of fearlessness on the part of teachers who are, ready to, push their kids to the next level and really embrace that experimental sort of edge. And those I feel like are always the threads within the posts that do the best. Now can I turn the questions again back on everybody else because I'm much more comfortable being a journalist. Do you guys see as educators out in the world? Do you feel like the school districts are now starting to break down the walls of blocking really useful, powerful social media sites like YouTube, like Twitter, like Skype? Do you feel like that landscape is also shifting at all, or do you feel like from what you can experience yourself and see out in the world, that there's still a block against it? I know, Matt, you having worked with San Francisco Unified, you experienced some kind of trepidation on their part. They didn't allow SFUSD students to use Twitter. And this is San Francisco, which is fairly liberal and progressive. And I'm just wondering what you all as teachers see out there. If anybody wants to jump in.
Well, I can speak about my fairly limited knowledge about different districts. I know for our district, the unblocking of YouTube last year was pretty substantial.
Mm-hmm.
And my sense is, and probably Sheryl and Vicki would have more information on, my sense is that is happening a lot more around the country, specifically unblocking YouTube. I know in our district, Twitter is blocked for students. Teachers can access it. So my sense is, apart from YouTube, there's still a fairly strong blockage on a lot of social media sites. But as far as I'm concerned, I think YouTube is a key element, and there are lots of other ways to get around to get students engaged with other classes and other information outside of Twitter from school.
Okay. Very interesting.
I have the opportunity to do a lot of speaking both nationally and internationally, and I've been doing this for probably about 10 years now, and so I see a lot of schools, and boy, when we first got started speaking about some of these topics, everything was locked down everywhere, and there was a real paranoia, and I remember people were losing their jobs, and there was all this caution about, if you are online in your personal life, don't follow your students anywhere, and it was like they would hear about all these wonderful ideas and these excellent tools to be able to connect and collaborate and co-construct, and then they'd go back to their schools and they couldn't use any of them. Mm-hmm. But more and more, especially within the last 2 years, what I've found is that because people are more willing to share out what's working, how they're doing it, how they're either reducing the filters or unlocking it and being open, and why, seeing more and more stories about where they'll spend. I remember in Australia there was this one where they had just spent, I think it was $9 million on this amazing system that was going to totally filter and lock down for the kids, and it took something like 45 minutes for the kids to be able to bypass it and find a workaround. And so as more and more stories came out like that, and then people started sharing about their successes, it's been my experience, especially in the places where I'm keynoting and working with schools, is that people are reducing the restraints, that they're seeing the value of being able to connect and collaborate with other people around the world. And so to answer your question, I would say yes, that I've seen a definite lightening up on the strong control of social media.
That's great to hear. Vicki, what do you think?
Yeah, I would agree with that. If you follow Tom Murray's work, he moderates the EdTech chat on Twitter, and he has a new job working with the Alliance for Excellent Education, and they have a tool called Project 24 that is free, and he's doing a lot of work with the states EdTech directors. So all the state EdTech directors have an alliance, and they're really starting to connect. And I believe that tools, they have this tool that you can take that kind of identifies where you have gaps, and tools like that are really showing districts that they are harming children. For example, children who are in poverty tend to not have access to these tools at home. So there is the digital divide. Well, they're also the schools that are blocking the most resources and giving the least access to technology. So we're exacerbating the digital divide by not allowing schools to have access to it, particularly our Title I schools. So if you look at work like Project 24, the fact that the EdTech directors are communicating, I believe that in the next few years, kind of like Sheryl's alluding to, that it's going to be the exception that things are blocked. Because now people are realizing if you have an excellent 21st century school, you're using YouTube. I mean, I'm using Sophia I don't flip my classroom, I use something called the N-Flip, which is I don't have enough people who have access to internet because we're in rural Georgia. So we're actually using the videos in class. And what is the best tool for that? It's definitely YouTube. It's faster, it's better, you could use it on every resource. So I really believe it is shifting, but I think that it's the intentional work of people like Tom Murray and other researchers to help identify these gaps, because they were afraid of E-rate and not following the law and being sued, and the lawyers really had control. And now that we have so many good best practices, I mean, schools that Sheryl's working with, there's schools all over that are great examples, and they're not getting in legal trouble, it kind of gets that argument to the wayside, and we start focusing on learning instead of some artificial fear. Fear is false evidence appearing real. Typically when you have fear, you have bad decision making on all levels.
I haven't heard that before. I like false evidence appearing real. No, that's a really interesting point. I just want to shift gears a little bit to talk about some of the pitfalls we all might fall into using social media, sometimes Twitter, some on Facebook. But you know, the danger of falling into what we call this echo chamber, which is you know, kind of using jargon, using words. Some people understand what it means, other people don't really understand what it means, or they have a different definition for it. Sometimes it gets appropriated. The words that, you know, we want to use to mean some things get appropriated by a completely different cause, which then leads to lots of other conflict. But Larry, what do you think about the idea of, you know, the echo chamber? What are your thoughts?
Well, I think with social media and ed tech and in general life, we tend to want to connect with people who are like ourselves. That is a natural inclination, and you know, on all levels. And I think social media and ed tech is no exception to that rule. And I think that on several one, I mean, I think our panel represents part of it is that there's a strong representation of whites on, and social media related to ed tech, and we need to be conscious of that. And I know one of the things that I try to do is to be very intentional about connecting up with people of color in social media. And I think I learn a lot. Can
you talk about that a little bit more? What do you mean? What do you mean when you say that, Larry?
That I learn a lot?
Especially specifically. What do you learn from people who are different from you? What are some of the lessons?
Well, I think clearly, different perspectives. I mean, I spent 19 years as a community organizer prior to becoming organizing in ethnic minority low-income communities, and I've always learned. I mean, people have different life experiences. There are different code words that mean different things to different people that I'm not aware of. That they're just different perspectives. People bring their life experiences to perspectives, to issues. That for some people, ed tech is not the most important issue. That some of us are teaching in schools where it would just be nice to get the room cleaned. And I mean, and our school is no different. I think the dangers of just connecting up with people who are ed tech advocates. I mean, I try to. I mean, there are people who are on social media who are certainly more in the Luddite category, but are connected to social media to get their perspective out. In education policy, I mean, I'm a real strong proponent of sort of progressive school change, and pretty hostile to typical many things that are being done in the name of school reform. But I try to follow and read what people, what school reformers say. And I think that there's just dangers of this echo chamber, just as in real life. And we just need to be intentional about not making the same mistakes in social media that many of us make in real life.
Right. That's a really, really good point. Sheryl, do you want to add to that?
I do. First of all, Larry, I want to thank you for what you said. I'm Native American, and so related to many of the things that you were saying and was inspired by them. I don't know if you've read the book by Peter Block, Community, but it's not necessarily about anything that has to do with online, but yet everything that he talked about in real-life communities applies to online communities, which is where my passion is. And so it's very interesting. But as I was thinking about the echo chamber, I guess the idea that comes to my mind is there's a great book by Johansson that it talks about the Medici effect, and I don't know if any of you have read it, but it's a wonderful book that talks about this idea of the ceiling that happens when you bring like-minded people to sit around a table and are trying to work towards innovation, and that you can only go so high because the schema or the experience level that those individuals have are so common. But yet, when you put different people at the table, like let's say you brought somebody in from finance, and somebody in from education, and somebody in from shipbuilding, and somebody in from television or entertainment, that the ability to innovate just was off the chart because everybody brought such a rich, thick, different experience or schema to the table, and I think that's what we really need to be reminded of when we're building our personal learning networks, that you don't want to just bring people in that are the same as like all second grade teachers if I'm a second grade teacher. Instead, I want to really be able to pull different people in from different areas of my passion, really think of yourself holistically and what kinds of things are you interested in? So like, for instance, in mine, there's social reform, there's looking at children of poverty, looking at bicycling, I commute, medicine, biology, and I pull people from all those different aspects in, as well as people who have different ideology, different culture, different geography, and maybe even different religion, different viewpoints, and absolutely people who disagree with me, because they help to keep me in check and help to keep my mind open. And by having those different kinds of people into my personal learning network, I truly have grown as an individual. So I totally agree with what Larry said, and appreciate him saying it.
Thank you, Sheryl. Yeah, that's. Go ahead, Vicki. I know you want to add some words too.
And I think it's important to have lots of different kinds of diversity. I mean, we have race, we have gender, we have rural versus urban, we have lots of different types of schools that we need to consider. I mean, there's so many things that you want to think about. And then also reading out of field. A lot of the biggest innovations in my own classroom happen when I'm reading completely out of the education sphere. But I love what Larry said. He used the word intentional. I follow a guy named Michael Hyatt who wrote a great book called Platform, and he really talks about being intentional with your life. And so, like, I use a tool called Social Bro to help me figure out who to follow, because it's kind of, I don't want to say out of control, but it can be hard when you start getting a certain volume, and I know everybody here on the show understands that. And so I'll intentionally search for people who have the word teacher in their profile, and I try to find people who are talking about teaching no matter who they are. And then you also want to diversify platforms. Certain types of people are attracted to Twitter, but you'll find a lot of pre-service teachers on Tumblr. You'll find, different elementary teachers on Pinterest. So I may not spend time on all of those platforms every day, but I do think it's important to be intentional to include lots of different types, but also to advocate in a very professional way for our conferences to have more diversity. And I'm just going to be very blunt. I think that our conferences are not as diverse as they need to be. There are a lot of excellent people out there in the profession. And, I've already told the people at ISTE, for example, the only women I can remember speaking have been actresses. You've got Sheryl who could keynote. You've got all kinds of women who could keynote. You've got Refrance Davis. And that's just one thing. I'd love to see how many of people of color have keynoted that were women, for example. But, I think that our diversity at our conferences has to get better. And you don't pick somebody because they are diverse, okay? We have to be careful about that. But with all the people to choose from out there in this wide world of incredible educators, we can do a better job of having a more diverse group of educators at our conferences to speak. And that's just how I feel, and some people may disagree with that, but I just think that's, I'm ready to see women educators take very large platforms and speak. That's how I feel as a teacher, because I feel like 80% of us teachers are women, and we should hear from other women teachers too. Not that men don't have a lot to say, but they do, and I respect so many of them. But that's just trying to say that as diplomatically as I can, because I do love ISTE. It's a great conference.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. I saw a lot of tweets and blog posts going around that right before ISTE, right around ISTE too. Fascinating discussions about that. Larry, I'm going to let you ask that question about closed networks, and maybe you can even frame it the way you want to, considering that it's less of an issue in high schools, and I know you want to ask Vicki about that.
Yeah, I think one of the questions that came up on Twitter related to this was someone asking about closed social networks for students. And I know that's a particularly important issue for younger students. My suspicion, at least, of an issue, and I suspect for other high school teachers is, but there's issues of safety, legality. And I know Vicki has. I mean, I've seen some of the things that she has written and spoken about in terms of resources for closed networks, and Sheryl, I'm sure, has some ideas on that too. Since I don't, so I think maybe you could start with Vicki.
Thanks.
Well, there's lots of approaches. I mean, if you look at Karen Learman and Kathy Cassidy, their approach with very young children, first, second graders, Maria Nee is another example. They actually are like a funnel. So the kids write the tweets and then the teacher actually posts. So you can have kids public. They won't have their own account. There's appropriate ways to do that. But Edmodo and EduBlogs and Kid Blogs, there's so many places to be able to share and to connect. So I kind of think there's a continuum. You would never take a goldfish and dump it in the ocean or dump it into a big body of water, or any fish for that matter. When you move fish, there's a progression. So our beautiful students are like fish in some ways. We may have them in an aquarium, and then we may move them into something larger, and then we may get them adjusted. But eventually, by the time they graduate, we want them to have an e-folio. We want them to have a positive digital footprint. A lot of people call it a digital tattoo because you can never erase it. We want them to have a positive footprint or tattoo out there to share with the world. My students create their own website, and then a lot of them will change and put their full name when they graduate and use it as their ongoing e-folio for much of their life. I mean, I have kids graduating from college. They're using it to get a job now, but it still has their videos they made in some early projects on there because they were great videos. So there are ways to do all of these different.
And
there's
several new tools. Sorry to interrupt you, but do you actually coach them like A through Z on what kinds of information is appropriate to share, and certain things are secure, certain things are not? What age do you start? When is that appropriate to start talking about?
Well, it's never really too young. I mean, there are a lot of resources, Common Sense Media and all these others. One of the first things I always think you should teach kids is I have a free poster that you can get off my website, and it's stop, screenshot, block, tell, and share. The first thing students should learn how to do is take a screenshot on any device. Any device, because if you block before you screenshot, you've just erased everything and you have nothing to deal with. So that should be at a very young age, but that's, we don't want to get too much into the fear. I've talked to my students about you are professional students. You have a way you behave in the academic world and then eventually in your profession that's different from your social life. You'll capitalize, you'll spell correctly, you'll do all these things. So I actually have kids that are under 13 that I take into a private Ning. I like Ning because it looks like Facebook. I do have to pay for it. It's like $280 a year. And then I'll take them publicly. But I don't take them public until I can trust them to me not have to pre-approve. But there's best practices for all age levels. I write about that a lot in my new book, Reinventing Writing. But there's best practices, and then there's the other thing of building community, which is for every blog post, I want my students to comment on 3, because there's conversation. It's not just about sharing, oh, look at me. It's about grabbing that mirror and shining it on others and conversing and talking and respectful dialogue. I mean, that's the one type of person I typically do not follow. It's fine to disagree. It's how you disagree. I think when you're an educator, it's very important to disagree in a professional, respectful way that respects the person, while you may disagree with what they have to say.
Okay, so you start them young. That's interesting. Could I change the subject a tiny bit? Matt brought up this point, and I don't know, Matt, if you want to weigh in here, but the idea of using some of these tools, things like polling, like Poll Everywhere, and those kinds of things, do you feel like those are adding a lot of value to what's happening in the classroom? It seems like it might take a while to try and figure out how to use it, to experiment with it. Sometimes it doesn't turn out to be worth the effort at that point, whereas you could maybe just ask the students to raise their hands if they get something or they don't get something. So I'm just wondering, like, what is that sort of, point of, I guess, return on investment with any of these social media tools? And how do you find that sweet spot? What's worth it? And what's okay to skip?
That was perfectly stated. Thanks.
Sheryl, do you want to weigh in on that?
Yeah. So one of the things that I think is most important when you're thinking just going to be more noise, or if it's truly going to be a deep learning option, is to not start with the tools. Instead, and it's really interesting because a few years back, hardly anyone was saying this. The focus was on the gadgets and the tools and the excitement and the novelty of it and this tool and that tool. And I used to tease that we were kind of like lemmings, you know, that would run over here and then another tool would come and we'd run over there. And I think now that more and more people, though, are realizing that the learning needs to come first. And so what I recommend to people is that you want to look at, when you're considering a particular social media in terms of its value add, that what you want to do is you want to think about, okay, what is it that I want kids to learn and I want them to know and be able to do? And then pedagogically, how am I going to go about that? And then is there a technology that will fit perfectly with that, that will really deepen that learning for them? So I'm thinking about the relationship between pedagogy, content, and technology as I'm choosing different social media. And if it doesn't just make the content easier to understand, if it doesn't transform the learning for the kids, then I'm not going to do it for technology's sake. I'll have a lot of teachers that'll say to me, I know, well, my professional learning goal is going to be that I'm going to blog next year. I'm really going to learn how to do that, and I'm going to get the kids blogging. And I always ask them why. Absolutely, I'm a proponent of blogging, and I think it produces deep writing, and it gives you an authentic audience, and it can allow kids to learn in collaborative ways, and it allows for peer review and peer assessment of each other, and so I think it's a wonderful, but I want the educators to really think about what is it that I'm trying to accomplish, and is blogging the best way to do that, and is there a particular pedagogical strategy that's going to work better with blogging than it would with paper and pencil? How is it different? And so I guess for me, it's a matter of really thinking, not just using technology for technology's sake, because I think that doesn't have the rigor that we're going to need in the classroom. It doesn't allow for deep learning. It doesn't allow me to really truly develop my voice as a student with these tools and to deepen my understanding, but that sometimes it just takes up time, or it's just an additional noise, or it just makes it more confusing when maybe a face-to-face strategy would have worked better.
Yeah, I can see that sometimes people twist themselves into knots trying to make something work, and in the end, you know, you could have just done it by having a conversation just as easily. Larry, what do you think?
Oh, I think Sheryl has given a perfect answer. I too used the phrase value added in the context of this, though that's been sort of hijacked in the as a teacher evaluation phrase, so I don't like that. But the only other thing that I'd like to add is, on occasion, I will use a gadget or a site that would be the equivalent of doing something in paper, or doing, you know, it would be just as easy to do something another way, just to switch things up a little bit, to help engagement. I won't make it as a, you know, regularly, but, you know, sometimes it just adds a little bit of to try to promote a little higher level of interest.
Interesting.
Great.
Vicki?
Well, oh, go ahead, Vicki.
Oh, sorry. You just,
no, we have about 2 minutes. Go ahead, Vicki. You have any final thoughts to that? Oh, okay.
No, let's go ahead and conclude. I'm fine.
Okay, great.
We've had a great conversation.
Yes, I would definitely like to concur that this has been an amazing conversation. Thank you guys so much for your participation in this. And Sheryl, yes, I do have to definitely agree with what you have to say about, you know, the pedagogical strategies of using the tools. I think it's always it's a skill to associate what you're trying to teach and find certain technologies to help transform that teaching, not necessarily substitute in. And I think that's something that we can learn from. So we are just about out of time. Again, I want to thank everyone for participating today. This has really been a really excellent conversation. Thank you, Tina, for moderating. We'll have a full video recording of this webinar available immediately on www.kqed.org/teachdonoww, or you can go directly to educatorinnovator.org, who has been so gracious to host this series, and you can watch the video there. On kqed.org/teachdonoww, you can also access this week's Do Now prompt about professional learning networks, and you can view and discuss this issue throughout the week. This wraps up our first webinar of the Teach Do Now course. but that doesn't mean our conversations have to just pause here. We encourage everyone to keep the energy going by using the Twitter hashtag #TeachDoNow and by getting involved in the ongoing conversations within the TeachDoNow Google Plus community. Mark your calendars for next Monday, July 14th at this same time at 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern for the second webinar in this series as we explore the value of connected learning, again here at Educator Innovator. And you can check TeachDoNow for the link for that as well. Again, I want to just thank everyone for participating and the viewers and participants for chiming in with your questions. If you want to learn more about Educator Innovator and its network of partners and sign up for the Educator Innovator newsletter, please check out www.educatorinnovator.org. And lastly, for more information about connected learning activities happening this summer, check out www.makesummer.org and follow the Twitter hashtag #MakeSummer. So that's 5 o'clock, and I would like to thank you again, and this wraps up our first webinar. Have a great evening, everybody.
Thank you.
Yay.